Canada is hitting back hard in response to Donald Trump's escalating trade war. After new U.S. tariffs were imposed, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced retaliatory measures targeting billions in American exports, from cars to agriculture. The message from Ottawa is clear: Canada won't be pushed around. Watch the full video for the full scope of Canada's countermeasures, how they impact U.S. industries, and what's at stake for North American trade.
You know, sometimes even the closest of friends can find themselves in a bit of a pickle.
Mm-hmm.
And when those friends are two of the world's largest trading partners, well, that pickle can have global ripples, stretching far beyond their shared border and potentially reshaping the very nature of their relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's precisely where we find ourselves today, embarking on a deep dive into the recent escalating trade tensions between two nations, often described as having the most successful bilateral relationship in the world, Canada and the United States.
Right. That description makes this current situation even more striking.
Exactly. We're going to unpack a truly striking new threat that's been issued from south of the border and the dramatic, often pointed analysis surrounding it from a Canadian perspective.
Indeed. And the language being used, particularly from Canadian commentators, it's incredibly strong.
It really is.
It reflects not just the gravity of the immediate situation for both nations economically, but also these profound implications for the wider international landscape.
That's it. It's not just about trade numbers or tariffs.
No, it's fundamentally about trust, sovereignty, and the very nature of international relations between these long-standing allies.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
For this deep dive, our primary source material comes from excerpts of a very pointed analysis by Scott Reed on BNN Bloomberg.
Okay.
He was reacting to a specific, and I'd say highly charged announcement that landed like a bombshell in Ottawa.
Right.
His commentary is insightful, yes, but also deeply critical, and it really pulls back the curtain on the sentiment north of the border, providing a vital Canadian lens on these developments.
That's important context.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is to cut through the noise, examine the actual facts and interpretations presented in this compelling analysis, and figure out what it truly means for this vital, historically close relationship.
Sounds good.
We'll look at the specifics of this, unprecedented tariff threat, dig into the underlying motivations suggested by the analysis, explore Canada's complex and, frankly, agonizing dilemma in how to respond, and ultimately, consider what this all means for the future of trust in international agreements when, traditional diplomatic norms seem to be eroding.
It's crucial for our understanding that the BNN Bloomberg analysis isn't just a neutral report. It's a strongly articulated perspective.
Right.
It challenges the stated justifications for these actions. It forces us, as listeners, to look beyond the immediate headlines and consider the deeper implications of what are being described as, aggressive trade tactics.
Yeah.
It's an urgent call for reflection on the current state of this critical bilateral relationship.
And when you hear the initial details of this threat, you'll quickly grasp why the reaction, particularly within Canada, was so sharp and immediate.
Okay.
The core announcement, according to Scott Reed's analysis, is a proposed 35% tariff on all Canadian goods and services.
Oh, wow. All goods and services.
All goods and services. Now, let's pause on that for a moment. This isn't a targeted measure aimed at a specific industry like steel or aluminum, as we've seen in past trade disputes.
Right, not surgical at all.
No. This is an all-encompassing, comprehensive tariff, hitting everything from energy exports and auto parts to agricultural products and manufactured goods.
That's massive.
And to make matters even more impactful, it's set to come into effect on a specific near-term date, August 1st.
August 1st, so very soon.
Very soon. It's a shockwave, plain and simple, because it signifies a broad and incredibly impactful measure designed to exert maximum economic pressure across the entire Canadian economy.
To truly grasp the scale of this, you really have to think about the intricate, decades-old web of interconnected supply chains between our two nations. A 35% tariff across the board isn't a surgical strike, like you said, which might target a specific sector to achieve a narrow policy goal.
Right.
Instead, it's an economic sledgehammer. It's designed to disrupt the entire fabric of industries that have coexisted and codepended for generations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. For instance, Canadian lumber becomes prohibitively expensive for American construction, directly impacting housing costs in the U.S. Auto parts. They flow across the border multiple times during the manufacturing process, meaning this tariff could threaten factory jobs on both sides.
Right. It's not just a one-way street.
Not at all. Energy exports, vital to both countries, would face immediate disruption. This isn't just about trade figures or adjusting prices. It's about potentially forcing wholesale restructuring of industries, leading to job losses and significant economic pain in critical sectors.
So it signals a willingness to inflict widespread economic disruption.
Precisely. Which is an extremely aggressive stance even between economic rivals, let alone supposed allies. It unequivocally elevates the conflict beyond typical trade disputes into something far more severe and indiscriminate.
And the emotional core of this reaction in Canada, as articulated by Reid, is absolutely palpable.
You can imagine?
The analysis reflects a profound Canadian sentiment, using phrases that cut deep like, "here we go again," and stating bluntly that Donald Trump just treats Canada like trash over and over and over again.
Wow, that's strong language.
It is. You can almost hear the collective sigh of exasperation and weariness, the feeling of being repeatedly threatened and dismissed by a country that, historically and strategically, is supposed to be our closest ally, our closest economic partner, our closest security partner. It's a very strong reflection of the deep frustration of dealing with such unpredictable, often demeaning behavior from a nation that has, for generations, been Canada's most reliable and vital partner.
This "here we go again" sentiment is particularly telling because it speaks to a deep historical context.
Explain that a bit more.
Well, for over a century, the U.S. Canada relationship has been defined by stability, mutual respect, and a deeply integrated, mutually beneficial economic partnership.
Right, the longest undefended border, et cetera.
Exactly. Our economies are inextricably linked. We've cooperated on everything from continental defense to cultural exchange. It's a relationship built on shared values and trust.
So this current behavior,
as described in the analysis, this repeated dismissal and aggressive posturing sharply deviates from that historical norm. It creates not just policy disagreements, but a profound sense of betrayal or at least immense disappointment regarding the foundational trust that has long underpinned the relationship.
so not just policy, but trust itself is ruptured.
Yes. It's not just a rupture in trade policy, it's a rupture in the expected conduct between close allies. And that causes significant emotional and strategic fatigue.
So the raw emotion of, "here we go again," is palpable, a feeling of betrayal perhaps from a supposedly closest ally. But beyond the sentiment, Scott Reid's analysis pivots quickly to the very basis of this threat,
Okay.
asserting that the underlying justifications for this unprecedented tariff, as laid out in the American president's letter, are nothing short of a picket fence of lies and one belligerent set of lies.
A picket fence of lies, again, really striking wording.
This isn't a gentle disagreement over economic theory. It's a direct, forceful accusation of deliberate falsehoods. It truly challenges the entire premise of the U.S. action.
That's the core question, isn't it? Because in international diplomacy, truth traditionally holds currency.
Supposedly.
Right. When it's abandoned so readily, it signals that the negotiation isn't truly about mutual understanding or addressing legitimate grievances, but about raw power. When a leader presents a rationale that is so easily disproven by facts on the ground, it strongly suggests that the stated reasons for the tariffs are not based on reality.
Okay.
Instead, it points to other unstated motivations, which immediately erodes credibility and makes genuine dialogue incredibly difficult. It forces you to look beyond the surface justifications, raising the critical question of why such transparent falsehoods would be employed.
Exactly. And the source provides a specific, compelling example to bolster this claim of alleged falsehoods, focusing on the issue of fentanyl.
Okay, fentanyl.
The letter from the president apparently cites Canada's inaction on fentanyl as a primary justification for these sweeping tariffs. But the BNN Bloomberg analysis directly counters this, detailing that Canada has, in fact, taken significant and costly actions. Reid outlines that Canada has taken action at the border. They've spent billions of dollars.
Billions.
And crucially, they passed a piece of legislation within his first new parliament after the new prime minister was elected.
So, concrete actions.
Yes. Now, here's an interesting and important nuance. The source notes that this legislation was, in fact, quite controversial within Canada itself, with many civil rights activists worrying extensive powers of the state too far. So Canada acted, and arguably quite forcefully, even at the cost of domestic political controversy and civil liberties concerns.
Right, so they took heat domestically for acting.
Exactly. Yet, despite all these documented efforts, the American president, according to the analysis, dismisses it all as inaction.
Wow.
It's a complete and utterly blunt disregard for the facts on the ground.
Precisely. When we talk about a picket fence of lies, specifically referencing fentanyl, it signals more than just a factual disagreement. It weaponizes a genuine societal crisis, the opioid epidemic.
Right.
By misrepresenting an ally's efforts, turning a public health concern into a political cudgel.
Using it as leverage.
Yes. The insight here is how seemingly disparate issues are strategically co-opted and distorted to serve a particular domestic narrative, effectively using a shared challenge as leverage in a trade dispute.
It's cynical.
It suggests this isn't just a misinterpretation, it's a wholesale rejection of reality as perceived by the Canadian government and supported by verifiable evidence. This suggests that the issue of fentanyl, while perhaps a real concern for both nations, is being used as a pretext or a political football.
Rather than a genuine basis for policy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rather than a basis for discussion or cooperative problem solving. When the facts are ignored, negotiations become performative rather than substantive, and that is a profoundly destabilizing tactic in international relations.
Speaking of negotiations, it's absolutely critical to remember that this whole drama isn't happening in a vacuum.
Right, there's context.
Canada and the U.S. are supposed to be an ongoing, active negotiation to try to secure some kind of framework deal to go forward. This tariff threat is unfolding against the backdrop of supposedly productive trade discussions aimed at solidifying the future of cross-border commerce, especially in the wake of the renegotiated USMCA.
Right, the successor to NAFTA.
And then the source introduces another critical element into this already complex equation, a clear deadline. Mark Carney, a highly significant figure in Canadian economic policy,
Former governor of the Bank of England, Bank of Canada.
had apparently imposed a July 21st deadline to get that deal done.
Okay, so Canada set a deadline,
Yeah.
July 21st.
So you have this incredibly important ongoing negotiation, a proposed agreement on the table, and a clear, albeit ambitious, deadline from the Canadian side.
This is the established diplomatic framework for achieving a resolution, a well-understood process in international trade. It sets an expectation of good faith and mutual effort to meet that timeline.
Right. But then you have this new tariff threat with its August 1st effective date.
After the Canadian deadline.
Yes. This is where the analysis truly highlights the diplomatic absurdity and the profound disconnect. The source explicitly states it's unclear how these two dates and deadlines intersect. And even more critically, the analysis concludes that this specific tariff announcement does not give you the impression that Donald Trump regards the 21st of July as a serious deadline for any kind of meaningful trade resolution.
So the actions don't match the supposed negotiation track.
Not at all.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is suggesting a fundamental and deeply troubling disconnect in diplomatic intent. If one party, Canada, sets a deadline for an agreement, and the other party, the U.S. administration, announces a highly punitive measure that takes effect after that deadline and seemingly independently of it, well, it strongly implies that the second party is not genuinely working towards that initial deadline or even towards a deal at all.
Right. The analysis doesn't pull punches.
No. It explicitly states Trump does not give you the impression that he's working toward any kind of pact, or even that he doesn't look like he wants a deal with Canada.
Which signals a breakdown.
A profound breakdown in the very premise of negotiation. It means the goal isn't necessarily a mutually beneficial agreement, but something else entirely.
And the analysis goes a significant step further in interpreting the American president's true motivation for this seemingly contradictory behavior.
What does it suggest?
It suggests that, based on his actions, it looks like he wants to score political points off of us and dunk.
Dunk. Wow.
Yeah. This provides a compelling why behind the seemingly irrational actions. It's not primarily about policy or trade negotiation, but about domestic political optics, leveraging Canada as a convenient target for his base.
This concept of using trade as a political tool, as outlined in the source, is incredibly destabilizing for international relations.
Also,
Well, when trade measures are driven more by domestic political calculation and a desire for dunking on an ally than by economic principle or genuine negotiation, it erodes the very foundation of international commerce and cooperation.
it makes negotiation pointless.
It tells the other party that their efforts at good faith negotiation may be futile, yes, because the real game is being played elsewhere, for a different audience. Such tactics make a genuine and lasting agreement incredibly difficult to achieve because the underlying motivations aren't about mutual benefit or solving shared problems.
But about power and politics.
Well, exactly. Leveraging power for short-term political gain. This also sets a dangerous precedent for future international relations, suggesting that agreements can be disregarded at will for political expediency, undermining the entire framework of predictable and trustworthy international engagement.
This brings us squarely to Canada's incredibly difficult and agonizing position. How does a nation respond to such a blatant, uncompromising, and seemingly politically motivated move from its closest partner?
Yeah, what are the options?
The source recounts previous instances where the American president huffed and puffed and threatened to blow our house down with various trade threats.
Right, we've seen this movie before, sort of.
Sort of. In those earlier situations, Canada, notably under the leadership of figures like Mark Carney, consistently responded with a strategic calm. And according to the analysis, that has worked to our general benefit, effectively diffusing tension and avoiding full-blown trade wars.
Okay.
You have to wonder, from a Canadian perspective, what the strategic logic was behind that calm approach then, and why it might have been perceived as effective.
Well, the calm approach previously employed by Canada was indeed a highly calculated strategic choice.
Calculated how?
Designed to diffuse tension and perhaps highlight the irrationality of the threats without reciprocating in kind. It was a gamble.
The gamble.
A gamble that by not reacting emotionally, the U.S. administration might eventually retreat from its more extreme positions, recognizing the mutual economic harm of escalation and the deep integration of the two economies.
So hoping reason prevails.
Essentially, this approach relied on the hope that reason, the fundamental interdependence, and the long-standing alliance would eventually prevail over short-term bluster. It was a demonstration of strategic patience, hoping to avoid a lose-lose scenario by not feeding into the aggressive rhetoric.
But the BNN Bloomberg analysis strongly suggests that this time is fundamentally different, and that the calm approach might no longer be viable or even advisable. The current move, this 35% tariff on all goods, is characterized by Reid as so belligerent, so dismissive of Canada, and so utterly disregarding of the efforts that supposedly have been underway in good faith negotiations.
So it's crossed a line.
It seems so.
Yeah.
It's not just another bluff or a fleeting threat. It feels like a significant systemic escalation that demands a different response.
The qualitative difference in this latest threat, as described in the source, is absolutely crucial. It's no longer just huffing and puffing.
No.
It's framed as an absolute missile pointed at Canada. This is a profound shift in rhetoric and potential action.
A missile.
Yeah. A broad 35% tariff isn't a negotiation tactic. It's an economic weapon designed to inflict maximum pain across the entire economy. This makes it far harder to ignore or simply weather with calm.
Because the damage is too great.
Exactly, because the potential damage is so immediate, comprehensive, and widespread, affecting every single sector of the Canadian economy and the livelihoods of millions. It signals an intent that goes beyond a desire for specific concessions, demanding a different kind of response, one that acknowledges the severity of the threat rather than simply hoping it will dissipate.
So it forces a rethink.
It forces Canada to reevaluate its entire strategic posture.
This leads directly to a strong recommendation from the source. Scott Reid questions whether there's any choice other than to show a flash of steel, show a flash of spine, and to threaten our own reciprocal tariffs.
A flash of steel, okay. Retaliation.
Yes. The stated purpose of this, as the source explains, is simply to catch his attention, to demonstrate that Canada is not a passive target.
Send a message.
Right. The analysis highlights the immense difficulty in imagining that Canada can just ignore this letter and pretend the discussions are undergoing in some sort of productive, typical fashion. Because, as the source bluntly puts it, they're not.
What's fascinating here is the strategic thinking behind advocating for a reciprocal tariff. It's not simply an act of retaliation, though it would certainly be that.
So what else is it?
It's also intended as a clear signal of resolve and a demonstration of economic leverage. Reciprocal tariffs mean Canada would identify key U.S. imports, perhaps targeting goods from politically significant states or industries vital to the U.S. economy, and levy their own duties.
Tit for tat, but targeted.
Precisely. The intent is twofold. First, to demonstrate resolve and show that Canada possesses its own capacity for inflicting economic pain, and second, to inflict a precise level of pain that makes the aggressor reevaluate their own costs and benefits.
So it's a strategic calculation.
It's a high-stakes poker game where each side raises the ante, but the aim isn't necessarily to collapse the table or start a full-blown trade war. Instead, it's a necessary show of force in a situation where the other side appears to respond only to displays of power.
To force them back to the table.
with the ultimate goal of forcing a return to genuine negotiation. It's a calculated risk to protect long-term economic sovereignty and deter future bullying tactics.
And this brings us to the core Canadian dilemma, as presented in the source. On one hand, there's the immediate, undeniable economic harm, the loss of income, the loss of industry, that would inevitably result from either absorbing the American tariffs or imposing reciprocal ones.
Right. Retaliation hurts you too.
Exactly. On the other hand, there's the imperative, the fundamental need to protect income and industry in the long run, and to defend national sovereignty against perceived economic aggression.
It's a classic, agonizing catch-22 situation for policymakers with no easy answers.
None at all.
This raises an incredibly important question for any government.
Yep.
How does a nation balance the immediate economic pain of retaliation with the long-term need to stand firm against perceived economic aggression?
There's a tightrope.
It's a treacherous tightrope walk. Imposing reciprocal tariffs would undoubtedly hurt Canadian consumers and businesses. In the short term, imports from the U.S. become more expensive, potential job losses, inflation. However, not responding or continuing with a passive approach might be perceived as weakness, inviting further aggressive actions and fundamentally undermining Canada's position as a sovereign trading nation.
So damned if you do, damned if you don't, potentially.
In a way, the dilemma isn't simply choosing between short-term pain and long-term gain. It's a complex strategic calculus involving maintaining credibility on the global stage, deterring future acts of aggression, protecting highly specialized sectors that are deeply intertwined with the U.S., and managing public sentiment.
Right.
It's about preserving dignity and deterring future attacks versus minimizing immediate disruption. And the choices made here will have profound and lasting implications for Canada's economic future and its standing in the world.
And this entire situation inevitably leads to a much broader and more critical question, one that the source itself explicitly raises. How can Canada trust that the states would even abide by it?
Abide by what? An agreement.
Exactly. How can Canada trust the U.S. would abide by any agreement? When we're being hit by sudden announcements like this, it's seemingly all too frequently.
That hits the core issue, trust.
It does. The analysis directly confronts the perceived character of the American president, stating bluntly that this isn't a person who's bound by honor, bound by truth, bound by rational thought and reaction.
That's incredibly blunt language about a head of state and ally.
Brutal, certainly, but it absolutely underpins the profound trust deficit being discussed, and it calls into question the very foundation of any future agreements.
This is a fundamental point, because trust is the absolute bedrock of all international agreements, from trade deals to security pacts to climate accords.
Without it, what's the point?
Exactly. If one party is perceived as unreliable, as acting outside the bounds of honor or rational thought, it fundamentally undermines the very basis of negotiation and treaty making. If there's no confidence that an agreement, once signed, will be upheld, or that it won't be arbitrarily discarded for political expediency, then the act of negotiating itself becomes meaningless.
It's more damaging than the tariffs themselves.
This erosion of trust is far more damaging than any specific tariff, yes, because it calls into question the entire framework of bilateral and multilateral relations. It's not just about this specific deal. It's about the future viability of any agreement with this particular administration, and it forces a profound reassessment of diplomatic strategy.
Following directly from that, the source highlights increasingly heard questions within Canada.
Such as,
what is the virtue and what is the value of an agreement with Donald Trump? What does it get you? What security does it offer us?
those are existential questions for the relationship.
They really are. These aren't just rhetorical questions, they're expressions of deep skepticism and profound frustration from a nation grappling with an unpredictable and seemingly unreliable partner.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, these questions transcend the immediate trade dispute between Canada and the U.S.
How so?
They speak to the reliability of international commitments and, by extension, the stability of the entire global governance framework. When a major power, particularly an ally, is perceived as being unpredictable and unwilling to be bound by conventional norms or even signed agreements, it creates immense uncertainty for all other nations.
Ripples outwards.
Yes. It forces countries to rethink their alliances, their supply chains, their long-term strategic planning. This isn't just about the dollar value of a trade deal. It's about the foundational principles of international relations and the very architecture of global cooperation.
It suggests a more chaotic world order.
It suggests that the current environment is one where even the most solemn agreements might be treated as transient, subject to the whims of individual leaders, which fundamentally destabilizes the international order.
And the analysis doesn't shy away from using incredibly stark language to describe the severity of the situation.
Like the missile comment.
Exactly. It characterizes this letter and its threat as an absolute missile pointed at Canada, and then poses the incredibly direct, challenging question. In what respect can this be seen as anything other than an act of economic war?
Economic war. That's extreme.
That's a powerful, alarming, and almost unprecedented way to frame the situation between two nations that have historically been such close allies.
Characterizing it as an act of economic war moves the discussion far beyond typical trade friction.
What does it imply?
It implies a deliberate attempt to inflict harm, to destabilize, and to coerce, rather than to engage in fair competition or even tough negotiation. Such strong language from an analyst reflects the perception that the actions are punitive and destructive rather than constructive.
So it ups the stakes dramatically.
It means that diplomatic relations are severely strained, and it frames the conflict as one of overt aggression rather than mere disagreement. It implies a zero-sum game, where one side's gain is necessarily the other's profound loss, setting a dangerous precedent for future interactions between nations.
It puts Canada in a corner.
It also places enormous pressure on Canada to respond in kind, not just to protect its economy, but to preserve its sovereignty and send a clear message that such actions will not be tolerated without consequence.
So as the source concludes, all of these incredibly complex and weighty questions are now ping-ponging around the Prime Minister's office tonight.
You can only imagine the conversations happening.
It really brings home the immediate real-world impact and the immense complexity of the situation for policymakers in Ottawa who are trying to navigate this. They're dealing with the immediate economic fallout, the long-term trust issues, the fundamental questions about the nature of their most important relationship, and the need to formulate a response that is both strong and strategically sound, all while facing a partner described in such incredibly stark terms.
This indeed highlights the incredibly difficult position any leader finds themselves in when faced with such unpredictable and aggressive tactics from a key ally.
No easy path forward.
None. They have to balance the immediate domestic economic concerns, protecting jobs, industries, consumer well-being, with the long-term imperatives of international relations, including maintaining sovereignty, deterring future aggression, and preserving a semblance of stability in a critical relationship.
It's a huge balancing act.
The choices made in such a high-stakes environment have profound and lasting implications, not just for the economy, but for a nation's standing on the global stage and its ability to trust and be trusted by other international partners. It's a true test of resolve, strategic thinking, and the ability to adapt to radically shifting international norms.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners, as we try to be well-informed in this rapidly changing world? We've delved into an unprecedented tariff threat from a supposed closest ally, and the profound questions this raises about trust, honor, and the very nature of international agreements in the 21st century. When the lines between ally and adversary blur and agreements seem to hold little weight beyond the moment they are signed, what truly anchors international relationships?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is. And what kind of leadership is required to navigate such an unpredictable global stage, where economic tools are wielded like weapons and the truth seems increasingly malleable? It's a question that extends far beyond a single trade dispute, impacting how nations will interact, negotiate, and perhaps rebuild, or perhaps redefine, trust in an ever-changing world. Something to ponder as these critical geopolitical and economic dynamics continue to unfold.
Thanks for watching Global Mind News. If you found this report helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. We bring you the facts, insights, and updates that matter, straight from the source. See you in the next report.